are go for launch at this hour for launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. The countdown is now proceeding. Less than 5 minutes now until the scheduled liftoff of the Shuttle Atlantis. The shuttle and its 5 astronauts during the course of their 5-day mission will deploy Galileo, an unmanned space vehicle that will fly to Jupiter, the trip taking about 6 years. Galileo is the most sophisticated and expensive unmanned spacecraft ever built, about $1.5 billion. Powered by 2 plutonium engines, this has prompted some anti-nuclear activists to try to get a court order to block this afternoon's scheduled launch. The court, though, has turned that down. You're looking now at the Galileo. In subsequent years, it's going to take 2 passes at Earth. It's going to take a rather circuitous route to Jupiter before it gets there in 1995. Let's go now to NASA and listen to the voice of Launch Control, Lisa Malone, as we follow this countdown. Delayed yesterday, delayed for 24 hours. Now all appears ready to go for launch in just a very, very short time now. Let's check in with NBC science correspondent Robert Bazell, who is down at the Cape. Bob?
John, the weather has been the only problem today, just as it was yesterday. The rain clouds came in and out, but today they went out. Yesterday they stayed in. It was a very close call. All morning long they've been watching these puffy rain clouds that seem insignificant to those of us who are standing around in the beautiful Florida sunshine, but they would be the constraint to prevent launch. The lightning, the electrical activity is the danger. Other than that, there are no problems on board the Atlantis. It's been a very smooth countdown. It's been a very smooth countdown for 2 days. So we're now into the 2nd day of a smooth countdown. We're coming up on 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and we're looking for a very good liftoff of the Atlantis right now. And right now, all the events are being run by a computer called the ground launch sequencer. A computer on the ground does everything automatically. A crucial moment in the count always comes at T-minus 31 seconds, and it's at that moment that the ground computer hands over all the operations to the computer on board. As you mentioned, there are 5 astronauts on board, 2 women, 3 men. They're laying there on their back. They must be very anxious right now. As we look at the close-up of that's called the beanie cap that comes off the top of the external fuel tank right there. That's loaded with enormous amounts of liquid hydrogen and oxygen that will power the shuttle. Okay, and it looks like we're ready to go here, John.
Yes, of course, there was that weather problem earlier, similar to the weather problem we had yesterday. There was a weather problem at the primary emergency landing site in Morocco, so they moved that emergency landing site to Spain. So all appears to be in readiness for the liftoff here. As you mentioned, the astronauts have been aboard the spacecraft Atlantis for quite some time now, about 3 hours, and they got a lot of couch time there yesterday, about 3.5 hours. So they are indeed most anxious for this liftoff. As you can see, it's a beautiful sky there, deep blue at the Cape. All is in readiness, and all appears to be going just fine with this countdown. Again, Lisa Malone, the voice of Launch Control, saying that everything seems to be going well. 3
engines are ready, and the liquid hydrogen tank is at flight pressure.
Coming up now on 1 minute to the launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. A very exciting mission coming up here.
T-minus 1 minute and counting.
A 5-day mission, 5 days and 3 hours.
The heaters on the booster joints are being deactivated. T-minus 45 seconds. T-minus 31 seconds.
Yeah, let's just go for auto sequence start.
We have a go for auto sequence start. Atlantis' 4 redundant computers have primary control of critical vehicle functions through liftoff.
20.
T-minus 20.
50.
15. 11. 10. 9.
Let's go for main engine.
We have a go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
Houston now controlling.
Well programmed.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Roll program initiated, about 110-degree roll maneuver.
This is the standard roll maneuver. Takes about 15 seconds here.
Guidance confirms a good roll maneuver. 3 engines throttling back now to 65% as Atlantis passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure.
Just a minute, we're going to get...
Throttle's now at 65%. APU's looking good. Velocity 2,000 feet per second.
Main engine throttle up.
Velocity now 1,400 feet per second. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
There it is. There it
Engines
is.
now throttle back up. Engines now back to 104%. All systems performing well. Standing by for separation of these solid rocket boosters at 2 minutes and 4 seconds.
Looks as though we're going to have a spectacular view of the engine separation, which will be coming up here momentarily.
Velocity now 2,700 feet per second. Downrange 10 nautical miles.
Separation coming up here just momentarily. And then Atlantis will be on its way into orbit, carrying with it the Galileo, the space probe to Jupiter. And there we have it. A beautiful, beautiful view of the separation, the pulling away as the spacecraft heads on into orbit.
Separation of SRBs confirmed. Velocity now 4,200 feet per second. Downrange 33 nautical miles.
So there we have it, what appears to be a flawless launch, liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis from Cape Canaveral after being delayed because of weather for 24 hours.
Nominal.
The performance nominal call. Performance nominal means that we are getting the expected thrust from the combination of the SRBs and the 3 main engines. Velocity now 4,800 feet per second. Downrange 53 nautical miles.
Atlantis, APU-1 to high speed. That's a real ship.
Let's check in now with Bob Bazell at the Cape. Bob, how did it look to you?
John, it looked as good as any shuttle launch has ever looked. It's a beautiful day, very humid. The crackling air put back the enormous force of the engine thrust. So it looks like Atlantis is finally on its way after a delay that really has been a delay since 1982 when this mission was supposed to originally be launched. But a lot of things went wrong. And it's finally on its way to put this magnificent spacecraft on its way to Jupiter.
All systems aboard Atlantis.
Let's go now to Houston, where we have NBC News correspondent Dan Molina. He is there with former astronaut Robert Overmyer. Dan, there had been a lot of talk and some complaints and worry about the power pack aboard the Galileo because it is plutonium powered, and there was some concern on the part of anti-nuclear activists that should there be an untoward incident, an explosion, if you will, there could be a real problem of spraying toxic plutonium over Florida. Apparently, we're certainly over that threat as far as things are concerned right now. What about that plutonium situation, Dan?
Well, there was a question, John, to begin with as to whether that was a legitimate threat. Certainly, the word plutonium conjures up the possibility of radioactive contamination in some people's minds. However, whether there technically or even theoretically was a possibility of plutonium contaminating Florida or anywhere, even if the shuttle could have some sort of catastrophic explosion like the Challenger explosion, that is a technical matter that is of some doubt right now. As a matter of fact, some of the mainstream environmental groups that we checked with when there was so much noise being made about that last week said that they did not agree with those who had filed the lawsuit trying to stop the shuttle launch. They said that they regarded it as such a remote possibility that they did not join the people who filed the lawsuit. Let me mention one thing to you here, John. Colonel Overmyer and I were just chatting right before we went on the air. We heard a call that one of the auxiliary power units had been ordered to high speed. Perhaps Colonel Overmeyer could elaborate on that just a moment.
That's right, Dan. The APU-1 was ordered to high speed, which is a precautionary move. As I hear it, it means that something in the controller on APU-1 is probably not controlling right at the nominal speed. By putting it to high speed, that they override the faulty controller. That would be the most logical requirement for APU-1. Now, Auxiliary Power Unit 1 does supply hydraulic power for the engine monitoring that, but at the same time there are backup systems, so it's a very minor annoyance, but it was a move that the pilot on his side of the cockpit would have to put that APU to the high speed during liftoff, which is a non-nominal minor annoyance, but certainly probably not going to affect the mission here.
Colonel Overmeyer speaks having been a pilot on one space shuttle mission and a shuttle commander on another. I noticed, Bob, as we were watching the countdown, that you reacted, as I'm sure the astronauts in the spacecraft must have been reacting. Can we finally get this thing going? Those are tense moments.
That's right, Dan. I'm sure that there was some very nervous time there for them. You really, when you're out there, you really want to go. And when they finally got that go for launch, even though they had to change the abort site, when they got that go for launch, I'm sure they're very, very pleased. And they've had one scrub, a suit drill, as we've called it in the past. They really wanted to go, and I'm sure they're pleased to be going.
Gentlemen,
and it seems to all be going well at this time.
Let's at this point take another look at what was indeed a spectacular liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis just a couple of minutes ago. We can see the main engines firing up here for, again, a most spectacular liftoff. Delayed, 2 or 3 minutes today because of some concern about the weather, way down range, but no real problems there at the Cape for the liftoff. Again, the main mission here for the Atlantis, and they will start work on this in about 6 hours or so, is the deployment of the Galileo, the most sophisticated, the most expensive unmanned space vehicle that has ever been built, costing $1.5 billion. A most exciting scientific venture there, the Galileo traveling to Jupiter and taking about 5 or 6 years to get there, rather long trip. But the scientists say will be most worth it when it gets there. You can just see the roll maneuver there of the space shuttle Atlantis. Continuing to check in with mission control now down in Houston. All continues to go well on this trip. It's going to the astronauts. 5 astronauts will be up there about 5 days and 3 hours. We are certainly approaching that period now, all going well for a go for an orbit condition, and we have no indication that it'll be anything but that. 5 astronauts aboard the Atlantis this afternoon, 3 men and 2 women. It's interesting to note the number of Purdue graduates that seem to go up in space. The commander of this mission is Navy Captain Donald Williams. He's been an astronaut since 1979, a graduate of Purdue University. There have been 17 Purdue graduates that have become astronauts. In fact, there are 2 members of this mission that graduated from Purdue.
Main engine cutoff confirmed by our booster officer.
We go about 25.9 plus 310 on the H-star.
Roger that, Don. You look marvelous going up.
Dan Molina in Houston, what do the scientists hope to learn from this probe of Jupiter?
Well, the mission can only be described as a spectacular advance for planetary science, John. It's so far, when Voyager did its flyby of Jupiter, it was only able to photograph, study in detail small sections of the planet. As Galileo orbits Jupiter, it will be doing very detailed studies of most of the planet, and the volcanic activity, for example, is something of enormous interest to scientists here on Earth. Jupiter remains for them a laboratory that in many ways mirrors the origins of our own Earth.
Okay.
And the wealth of science is nothing short of amazing.
Thank you very much, Dan. Of course, today we are following a major story, a story of great proportions, that being the earthquake in San Francisco. We have been covering it for some hours now. We would like to bring you an update on the situation. The confirmed dead now is listed at 272. 253 of them were trapped in the upper section of a bridge. You're right now looking at the Bay Bridge The Oakland Bay Bridge and the upper level of that bridge collapsed, as you can see, down into the lower area there of the bridge. The entire platform did not collapse into the sea, but as you can see, there is major damage and that bridge is blocked. But the major problem is a little bit down the road from that, and that is Interstate 880 that you've been hearing so much about. And again, authorities believe that 253 of the fatalities occurred there.
Sunnyvale, California, was needed to monitor tonight's deployment of the shuttle's main payload, the little Galileo spacecraft, which is being sent off on a voyage to Jupiter. But the Air Force tracking station got up and running in plenty of time, so Bruce Hall reports now from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on today's successful rise of Atlantis.
Let's do it today.
3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
The shuttle thundered off the launch pad, threading the needle, finding a hole in the clouds, avoiding the rain showers.
You look marvelous going up.
It's an incredible ride.
And there were spectacular pictures of the solid rocket boosters being jettisoned.
We're looking forward to a successful deploy.
The shuttle is now in orbit, where the astronauts are preparing to deploy the huge Galileo spacecraft on its 6-year voyage to Jupiter to take a close-up look at the mysteries of the solar system's largest planet. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center.
And the most sophisticated and expensive planetary explorer ever constructed is outward bound from Earth. Its ambitious mission underway at last. James Hattori reports on the voyage of Galileo.
It left 7 years later than first scheduled, but the $1.4 billion Galileo space probe is headed to Jupiter this morning.
Galileo is on its way to another world. It's in the hands of the best flight controllers in this world.
I was proud to see that we delivered the Galileo right where we said we would. Very soft, easy ride.
During its 6-year mission, Galileo will slingshot around Venus and the Earth, then spend 22 months over Jupiter, yielding some of the most detailed space photos ever.
We have ignition and liftoff of it.
Galileo's send-off came just 6 hours, 20 minutes after Atlantis blasted off from Kennedy Space Center, a launch delayed once by a computer glitch and once by bad weather. With Galileo on its way, the shuttle crew members will, starting this morning, turn their attention to a variety of onboard experiments before touching down in the California desert Monday afternoon. James Hattori, CBS News, Johnson Space Center.
There were indications that the annoying, baffling problem of space sickness may have struck again. This time, the victim appears to be Dr. Ellen Baker on the right, the astronaut who was sent into space to help physicians understand this illness. Before the flight, she talked about space sickness.
Some people feel sick enough that they actually vomit a few times, but life goes on and you press ahead with your duties, whether you feel well or not.
Space sickness feels a lot like motion sickness many experience on Earth, but it has become a significant barrier to living in the weightless environment of space.
Right now, we're running about 70% of crew members reporting some symptoms of motion sickness.
So symptoms may be very mild, ranging anywhere from just not feeling like eating, up to being very sick and wanting to, lock themselves into a corner and not really wanting to move around very much.
Researchers have spent more than 20 years trying to find the cause of space sickness. But so far, physicians have found no solution and cannot even predict which astronauts will get sick. Most astronauts get over space sickness in a day or two. So all NASA shuttle flights are now scheduled for at least 4 days, giving the crews plenty of time to get over their embarrassment and complete their task in space. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Johnson Space Center.
Training their cameras on Earth, sending back spectacular pictures of Typhoon Elsie off the Philippines. The storm looks calm from space, but in the Philippines, it left at least 4 people dead, and it's now headed toward Vietnam.
The astronauts have been sending a steady flow of soothing views of the globe, displaying the grandeur of Earth.
Our world is a beautiful place, and we do need to take care of it.
With a black and white camera, the astronauts photographed and described the spectacular southern lights, a luminous show created by solar radiation.
Now it's oranges and reds and violets and still the light greens and a little bit of blue. Shannon said it almost looks like the rain coming down from the universe onto the atmosphere.
On the first day of the flight, the astronauts deployed the Galileo spacecraft, the most sophisticated and expensive science probe ever sent into outer space.
Galileo is on its way to another world. It's in the hands of the best flight controllers in this world. Fly safe.
And in less than a day, Galileo survived its first threat, a surge of radiation sent out by a major solar flare from the sun. For the astronauts, it has been a smooth flight, only minor glitches hampering their 5-day glide through the weightless environment of outer space. And the same for Atlantis.
The spacecraft has been performing in an outstanding manner, and we've all been having a great time.
And now it is time to return to Earth. Atlantis is scheduled to land at 12:32 Eastern Time.
The shuttle crew deployed the little Galileo spacecraft while in orbit. Galileo, now more than 1 million miles out,